Let's go back. So it's about conservation law and the practice of conservation, and actually about ethics also. That's why in the object there are three objectives: to know the contents of the Philippine Heritage Law, or actually it's called by another name. I forgot. No? It's in the next slide. And then to know how heritage conservation is practiced in the Philippines, and finally to know the ethics in conservation practice. Now, I will not be talking so much about the last two topics, but I will refer you to, I will be posting some information in Canvas, especially on the last topic on ethics. There are a couple of videos that you have to watch, and the law itself, the Philippine Heritage Law, or actually it's the what we call the National Cultural Heritage Law. I also uploaded it in Canvas. I'll be posting that or publishing that after this lecture. So our main law is RA 166. So that is something that you have to memorize, no? 166. Um, it's an act providing for the protection and conservation of the national cultural heritage, strengthening the National Commission for Culture and the Arts, or NCCA, and its affiliated cultural agencies, and for other purposes. So um, the main agency, government agency tasked to implement this law is NCCA. Okay, so its objectives are threefold: to protect, preserve, conserve, and promote the nation's cultural heritage, its property and histories, and the ethnicity of local communities. And then second is to establish and strengthen cultural institutions, and finally to protect cultural workers and ensure their professional development and well-being. So this is actually written in the law. Now, unfortunately, this presentation has very few images. Okay, so there's a lot of text, and most of these texts are actually taken from the law itself. I just wanted to highlight what is more relevant or important for now in our discussion. In fact, the law itself has 14 articles. Sorry. What I wanted to point out here is the definition of terms. We should go through that. Each term is very important. It will come out in a quiz. And then the rest I will discuss. I will not discuss the last four articles. The Central Rizal, it does not apply to us anyway. And that's a very special organization, of course, the promotion of Jose Rizal as hero. So let's go to the first objective, which is protecting, preserving, conserving, and promoting the nation's cultural heritage, its property and histories, and the ethnicity of local communities. Okay, so we already went through this about cultural properties, how they are classified. So this is actually found in the law. Grades 1 to 3, and then there are uncategorized properties. Okay, so what is the privilege of a cultural property? So there are four. First is priority government funding for protection, conservation, and restoration. Okay, so the government has to pour money for that. I remember in Japan, so I noticed that there is still a lot of old houses. Okay, they all look alike, and then they are the typical old house, although some are has been renovated a little to put in some modern amenities. But from afar, and from afar, it's like everything seems to be harmonized. No, the same type of roof, the same colors, the same elements. So I have to ask my professor there. what was the government strategy, no, to encourage the people to retain? Why are they, or is it just the people themselves without any intervention from the government? And the reply was that the government actually gives money for repairs. Okay, if you repair it to become, to remain, to retain its old character. But if you're going to repair it and then renovate it and make it look otherwise, so they will not give the money. Okay, so of course you have to submit the blueprints of how you wanted it repaired, and then they have to come in. No? So incentives for private support of conservation and restoration through the Commission Conservation Incentive Program for National Cultural Treasures. Then an official heritage marker placed by the cultural agency concerned, indicating that the immovable cultural property has been identified as national cultural treasures and or national historical landmark, site, or monument. So the marker applies only to immovable cultural property. So you don't have like liturgical items with a marker on it because the marker is it's really big. It's made of marble or something, or stone maybe. Um, so it's like bragging rights that okay, if you own the property, for you it's bragging rights. But for LGUs who where the property, the um, cultural property is located, so it's also bragging rights in their on their part. So in times of armed conflict, natural disasters, and other exceptional events that endanger the cultural heritage of the country, all World Heritage Sites, national cultural treasures, or national historical landmark sites or monuments shall be given utmost priority protection by the government. Okay, so it's one of those that the government will try to avoid damaging, even if there's a war. So I remember in Marawi, there's this a post circulating, going viral of a soldier who called his commander or someone higher to bomb his uh, position because the enemies are already going to him, and since there's no escape, so might as well bomb his position so that to create a big damage, no? And to kill a lot of the enemies. Now, sometimes I was thinking, what would happen if he was trying to hide in the Rizal Monument in Luneta Park? Probably his commander will tell him to transfer first somewhere so that they don't destroy the Luneta Park, the Rizal Monument. But that's it's a very fictitious story, no? But anyway, the idea is that uh, as much as possible, so the government will avoid destroying the property. So the law would, when it comes to cultural properties, has these provisions. No, there is the declaration, the listing and lifting of national cultural treasures, important cultural property or property deemed important cultural property. The next slide is about the registry. So when they are declared, but there is also such thing as the listing. So you can be placed in the list, or you can also be removed from the list. Okay, that's the same thing as the World Heritage Sites. Um, it's possible that we we can have, for example, Banawe Rice Terraces is in the World Heritage Site, and then at some point, because every year or so, they will they would monitor and they would assess again. But then if it's not taken, it's not maintained properly, and its significance disappeared, so they have to be removed from the list. And I don't know whether the Banawe restaurants have been removed, because sometimes I see posts in Facebook. It may have been fake news. Um, anyway, rights of first refusal on the sale of national cultural treasures, important cultural properties, national historical landmarks, declared sites and structures. Okay, so the government does not own a lot of these cultural properties. Okay, They might be owned, for example, for liturgical items, they can be owned by the church. That's different from the government. Or even if it's a liturgical item, it might be part of a private collection of an individual or even a corporation, for example, or a museum, a private museum like Ayala Museum. Um, it's also possible that the property is owned by a government agency. Okay, like the Gabaldons are, well, technically owned by the Department of Education, and anything that belongs to the city or municipality is, of course, owned by the LGU. So therefore, if they have, if they want to sell the property, because they can, no? In Australia, they have what their rule is, regardless of the significance of the property or the object, if the owner does not want to have them listed, there's nothing that the government can do. Okay, so that's why of course, the owner can do anything with his own property, unless he already inks an agreement with the government, so there's a binding contract. Okay, but otherwise, if there's none, so they can sell it. But the law, at least, is asking the owner to make the first offer to the government. So the owner makes the first offer to the government or the government agency in charge of that cultural property. And then if they say no, okay, that's the first refusal, so they can offer it to anyone else. Mm, in Bohol, in Tagbilaran, there is a uh, part of a, it's a very small street. They call it Sitio Ubos. Okay. And it's supposed to be the earliest settlements in Tagbilaran or in Bohol, I think. And then there are maybe like 4 or 5 old houses there, and most of them are dilapidated, and the owners are thinking of selling them already. So that's why they were reminded, okay, please offer first to the government, either to the National Museum or whoever, or the NHCP. And so I think they did that, and then they're still working on it, on the budget. Anyway, third is licensing of dealers of cultural property. And then finally, dealings of cultural property. Okay, because just as the items are not owned by the government, so there can also be an exchange of items. Um, Although it will be offered to the government, but the sale has to be legitimate, and especially if it's going, if the government refuses, so, and it is sold in to another individual, another institution, the transaction should be legitimate. If it's going to be an auction, it has to be legitimate, so there has to be control. So regarding the registration and conservation of cultural property, so by now this pre-cook should be familiar to you, because this is our first topic when we talk about cultural properties. Um, so they have to establish a registry. In fact, just some moments ago, I was looking at a post from the Heritage Society, Conservation Society, because NCCA is now calling for the submission of list of cultural properties to NCCA. So it seems that their style now is, rather than the NCCA going around making the list, so they're asking now all the LGUs to make the list and submit to them, okay, so that there can be a registry, or the registry can be updated. And then conservation of cultural property, documentation, and preservation of traditional contemporary arts, and systematic research in natural history. So We'll be discussing all of this in the later slides. Okay. Now, earlier I mentioned that the owner can have an agreement with the say NCCA or the national government, no? um, in charge of the cultural property. And that on that agreement should have all of these provisions. So it should have a provision for public access to the property, so the property should be accessible to the public. They should be able to view it, etc. No? And then the value of the encumbrance, so they have to talk about how much should it would cost. Um, Duration of the servitude of the property, restriction of the right of the owner or occupant to perform acts on or near the place. So this is something that some owners do not like, no, because they will be limited in their options to develop the property. So, for example, there's a buffer zone so many meters away from the cultural property where you cannot build anything, especially if it destroys the view, and most especially if it's going to cause deterioration. I don't know whether I mentioned it here, but for example, Gabaldon buildings, most of them are made of wood, and so it's been like the tendency of teachers to plant, no, around the building near the walls, and then unfortunately these plants would only serve to uh, like transfer water from the rain to the walls, you know, because of the splashes of the when it splashes the water to the walls. Therefore, it makes the walls more um, um, exposed to moisture, and then it deteriorates faster. So when we were making the management plan for Gabaldon buildings, one of the recommendation is not to plant near the walls. It sounds very silly, but actually there is a reason, no? Just to protect the building. Um, I'm reminded now of a project in Dawis, the church in Dawis. So NHCP is the agency that restored the church, no, after the earthquake. And the parish priest then, of course, they cannot use the church, so they had a very small alternate church somewhere far. But each time it rains, really, it's very difficult. No, a lot of people get soaked, and so there are now people from Bohol who approached the parish priest and actually gave donations, no, like millions and so much money, just to improve the alternate church. Um, but then there's one ideal place for it, but the NHCP would not allow it because it's very near. So the funny thing there is that the parish priest was about to be transferred somewhere. So he had the alternate church built anyway. So it's just like a shed, although it's big, and right beside the convent of Taoist church. Then after, so they were able, without telling NHCP. So afterwards, when the church was finished and then there was a turnover, the head of NHCP saw the alternate church and was very angry. But by then, the parish priest was already transferred to another parish, so and he did not join anymore the turnover. So he got away with it. So there's some way of getting away with it, no? But there was no, at least at that instance, there was no written agreement between the parish and the NHCP. So that's why he was able to get away with it. Maintenance and management of the property, provision of financial assistance for the conservation of the property, and provision of financial assistance for this is double, procedure for the resolution of any matter arising out of the agreement. Okay, so these are the uh, agreements. Now, some of you from Cebu might be familiar with this. No? This is the Jesuit house, or otherwise called 1730 Jesuit house, because there is a marker, a bas relief, like a medallion that has the date 1730. So it's a sort of date, puts the date of either construction or inauguration of the building. So this makes it the oldest house or oldest marked house in the Philippines. Okay, and it survived because it is inside a warehouse. So if you notice, you cannot see the house very well. These are actually two houses. There's a house right beside this, which is the main house, which is made of stone from ground and second floor. But this one is called the annex. It used to be veranda, but then it's roofed, and these are just lattice works all around. No? So they're not really enclosed walls. But then, if you can see above the roof, there are GI sheets, and then there's a roofing. So it's really inside a warehouse. Okay, and it took a long time for the owner, the son of the owner, or maybe the grandchild, who is now very old, uh, took a long time for him to realize that this is actually an old house. And when he read about a history book about this house in Ateneo, no, where he was studying. So the owner um, did not want the to have this house listed, precisely because of what I mentioned earlier, no? That they don't want to be constrained to develop their own property. They don't want to be told, okay, remove the warehouse, no? Because the warehouse is a family business. And so he instead decided to preserve it, but with his own money and with the help of other institutions. Okay, so and so far it's been done. No? But lately, he realized that some of his family members are not really keen on keeping the house. If if he dies, simba ko lang. If he dies, so he was worried that uh, the rest of the family might just destroy the house. So somehow he has an attachment to the house already. So he decided finally to have it listed by the National Museum. And so the National Museum went and then inspected, and then they made an agreement, and they're supposed to put a plaque, that plaque that we've been mentioning about, or a marker. But they have not yet done that because of COVID. That's a very recent event. No? Now, the law also defines district zones, how to designate them, and how to maintain them. District zone is important if you have so many heritage or cultural properties within an area. Okay, so the zone can be a street, or it can be a bigger area, like one barangay, or maybe it's just a purok, but it has to be uh, a zone. Cebu is one of the oldest city of the Philippines, okay? And it's a wonder why they don't have a heritage district. Um, there's been a lot of study made, and then this part, it used to be like an intramuros. So intramuros, if you're familiar with the walled city of Manila, is really surrounded by uh, battlements, no, the walls. Uh, But when in Cebu, when they started here, they did not do that because there was that river, and this river actually cuts off this part of the island from the rest and serves as a protection. And secondly, they were not decided yet whether they should be the final like capital of the Philippines. Unfortunately, they decided to make it Manila, since the Cebuanos did not want the Spaniards around, no? So they're causing hostilities. Okay. And so there should have been a lot of buildings here which are important. The plaza, this at the lowest, the right corner, is the Fort San Pedro. In front of it is Plaza Independencia. And then there were other added buildings later on, which is now the Malacanang Palace of Cebu. And then the only problem is the government has not declared a heritage zone, so these were not protected. So one by one, these buildings disappeared. Okay, so now, for example, when I was trying to make a study on making these heritage zones, after all previous studies, trying to compile them, I was told by my professor, no, in Japan, that he made me realize that there was nothing there anymore, at least enough to define a district. Okay, so there's because otherwise, if it was like vegan, where the whole street is really made of old houses, so the houses really define the image of the street, but it's an old street. But here, you look one way, it looks there's an old building, but you look the other way, there's Jollibee, there's something very modern, and like the old building is like the one that's not that's a sore thumb, no, something like that, or it's not the most commanding building in the area. So therefore, it could be done probably around only a very small portion, like in front of the uh, City Hall, then the Plaza Rizal, and then Santo Niño, and then there's even that break, no, between the Santo Niño and the cathedral. So it was very difficult. I tried to make a study out of it when I was in my master's. This is just the high significance, and then the others are moderately significant, and then and this is not even complete because after I did this, I discovered a few other buildings tucked in, no? Like in the old trade school, now the CPU, or yeah, is that CPU? Anyway, CTU, sorry, uh, Cebu Technical University. So in the corner there, they have the alumni building, which is really an Art Deco, very old. And then also the Jesuit House, which I have not marked here somewhere, no? Which is very significant. So they're already, so even the carbon market is very far, and then I don't know, these other buildings are probably now renovated. Well, no? So at that time I was saying that, okay, this is a historic core and water area, they provide the point of interest during the day, and then the colon, which they wanted to revitalize, can provide the point of interest during the night. So, but then instead of recommending that this becomes a heritage zone, I decided to just recommend a heritage walk, which is familiar with the Freedom Walk in Boston, where all the points, the nodes, are far apart from each other, but they are linked only by something, you know, like the cobblestone path. So you have a brochure, and then it's like in their case they have a story. So they have like a book, and then there it's by chapter. So for chapter one, you go here, then there are significant buildings, and then you learn about that part of history. Then for chapter two, you have to walk there, and then so you're aware that you're going to walk in between modern buildings, and then you reach one building, an old one, and then there's the story. So that's one way of connecting them. So which can be done now, especially that there are a lot of heritage walks, walking tour, no, being done in Cebu, at least before COVID. But I heard that March it will be Cebu might be open to tourism, but I don't know. So incentive programs, if you own a property which is a cultural property or just cultural value, and you have it enlisted. So you can have tax exemption if you donate, or um, you can make, well, you can be part of a heritage resource assistance program. You might get financial assistance, or you can receive an award or a citation for at least for bragging rights. Okay. Um, in principle, there is money for that. Okay, in the second National Heritage Resource Assistance Program. But if the owner would ask any expert in conservation aside from me, they might say, no, don't bother, there's no money in government. But actually, there is money in government. No? And it's better for people to ask. Otherwise, this money would be channeled for something else, which are not really important. Okay. Um, the second objective is to establish and strengthen cultural institutions. Now, we already talked about some cultural institutions, but there are others. No? The powers of the commission or cultural agencies. So the commission here refers to NCCA, and then the cultural agencies are the others like NHCP and National Museum, and the rest, which I will show in the next slide. But so what are their powers? No? So first, they can issue a cease and desist order. Okay. My example here is I should have shown a picture, no? Now that I thought of an example. Um, so in Maribohok, the church, part of the national cultural, national important cultural treasure is an old stone stairway leading to the port, Pantalan. So Maribohok used to have a port which was very active, but now that's been transferred to Tagbilaran. But the port is still there, but only for local fishermen. But it connects the Pantalan to the church, and then there is that significance because of the trade and the church, etc. Anyways, when I came in, so this already happened. So I saw some documentation where the person where the what's that, no? This guy is actually wrote to National Museum asking the contractor to stop work because they're not doing the correct procedure. Okay, so he has to write a report. Okay. And that actually happened. So they stopped work, and then the National Museum had to go there and then inspect, and then tell them how to go about it. Okay, so what to do. So I at least I saw it like firsthand also happening, because when the contractors being very hard-headed also did not do the rest of the procedure, I was the one again writing the National Museum to ask for to cease and desist, and so the whole thing was again reprocessed. Power to issue compulsory repair order. Now this is another thing which is difficult for the owners, because if they don't maintain the property and it deteriorates, and the government agency, the cultural agency finds about it, that they are this is deteriorating because of neglect, so they can issue a compulsory repair order to the owner. And if the owner does not do that within like 30 days, so the government agency can make the repair themselves, but then charge it to the owner. Okay, so of course we know that the owner might not be able to get some money even after 30 days or so. So it will be an added pressure to him. especially if he does not value the property as much as the government did. Okay. So visitorial powers, so anytime they can come in, when the commission, of course with due with permission, but they should not be denied entry. They can be delayed, but not never denied. Power to deputize other government agencies, especially if the cultural agency is so far that they cannot go, so they ask someone else, they deputize someone else to inspect for them. That happens also in our project in Maribohok. So one time from San Carlos, architect Hava visited, and then she told me, okay, I've been deputized by National Museum and showed me an ID. Okay, so because since she was doing there anyway, and then they knew about it, so they asked her to make a report. So that's why if she asks something, we have to answer. No? Otherwise, if it is just anyone, so we don't have to answer the questions. So power to recover cultural properties, of course, anthropological research and archaeological exploration, excavation, then sharing of discovered materials. No, anthropological research and archaeological exploration is something that contractors do not like at all. Um, that happened also in the project. When they were excavating, they found bones. Okay, so and when that was reported, so the National Museum had to declare a cease and desist. So no work first until we examine. Then when they examined, they realized that there is a need to make an archaeological dig. Okay, so the anthropologist comes, they dig, and then they recover all the bones. Apparently, these are the bones of some priests which were buried in the church. In fact, their tombstones were there. And then, so which means that the whole project timeline has been moved. No, it's okay if we move it. Um, that is on the side of the contractor. There's no problem to move it as long as it's official that their finish date is also moved. But sometimes you schedule this because you know that you time it along with the weather, for example. So this time should be sunny or the rainy season. So something will not be in sync anymore. Okay, so this one is a environmental impact assessment. Now, for environmentalists, this is very important. Um, if the project is very big or the project is located somewhere where it has a very big impact on the environment, so DNR would require EIC, Environmental Impact Certificate. But before doing that, so it has to be assessed. Okay, but unfortunately, before the assessment does not include heritage structures, although the law actually has that, no, for DNR. When I examined it, it's actually there, but it's not emphasized. So they're just saying, okay, so many trees or so much soil can be moved, etc. But when there's a heritage building, or like, for example, there's a lot of commotion before about a very, very old bridge which will be torn down. Okay, so those things are not part of the report. So in this law, they made sure that heritage resources are included in the environmental impact assessment, especially if it is located in a heritage zone, okay, or a newly discovered archaeological sites. So this is a good example. This is Ili Rock. Okay, um, I think I mentioned Boloon before, but I was showing you a picture from the point of view of someone on Ili Rock. So now it's the other way around, where I'm now in front of the church, okay, then looking at the Ili Rock. So before it was like this. I mentioned to you that you have to navigate through a curve, and then there's that rock, and then once you go through that, you can see now a splendid view of the coastline with the church as a background, which makes it look very romantic, or something. So sometimes we see some couples there in their prenups shots. Um, but I realized later, and I did not know even about it, that the Ilirak is significant. It's one of those landscape, no, cultural landscapes, because there can be so many of these Iliraks along the coasts, and then they serve a purpose. Of course, they're natural, but people had like used that as a strategic, uh, a strategic device, no, to locate themselves, to protect themselves from more invaders. So Boloon is located exactly here because of the Ilirak and another one farther. Okay. So that's why it's an important cultural landscape, although it was not declared, and that's the problem. It was not declared, and it should be the responsibility of the historians to bring that up. So after the earthquake, the DPWH was very worried that this might have that there's some cracks along the rock, and then that this might fall. So they decided to chop off that portion. So they already started, and I don't know why it took so long for people to to react. So they already done this much damage when they started doing the consultations. And then it was there that among the heritage or the conservation practitioners, then we had our joke, no, about, because there was someone from DPWH that I think he was exasperated with the heritage group, and so he said that, this heritage uh, is it's not good for the development. So that heritage, he keeps on repeating. So it's an unfinished work, though they converted this platform here as a viewing deck. So they decided not to push through with it. So the heritage advocates won. But like most cases, they reacted too late. Okay. So what are the roles of cultural agencies? The cultural agencies are responsible for the designation of cultural property, linking with other national agencies, not necessarily cultural agencies, no? Incorporation of cultural property programs in local government unit budgets, and training programs. Now, these are the cultural agencies written in the RA 166. So I did not mention about CCP because really it's just in Manila. National Archives of the Philippines, we're not too concerned about it because of the more of books, especially National Library of the Philippines. Um, but at least there are these agencies. I mentioned only about National Historical Commission of the Philippines, formerly National Historical Institute or NHI, and the National Museum. And then there's also the Commission sa Wikang Filipino, which studied about especially the alibata, how it's going to be used. And the linkages with other government agencies are all of these government agencies, and then tourism, education. Intramuros, I mentioned about Intramuros, so they have their own like mini government there, the Intramuros administration. National Parks Development Committee, for example, we did work in Paco Park in Manila, and the Paco Park is a circular park, no? Um, and then it's being managed by the National Parks and Development Committee. So when we have to, so we go to them since they represent the owners. So Department of Education for Gabaldon buildings like this one, Obong Elementary School, is I forgot, this is somewhere south of Cebu. So this is now finished. Okay, it's been rehabilitated. Um, this one is something that I really want to share. If you're familiar with Lobok Church, so DPWH built a bridge that is going to, I don't know, from the looks of it, it will have to destroy the church if this was continued. Okay, um, but it's supposed to turn a little. But even if it did avoid the church, it's going to cover the church, so it's going to mar the view. Okay, um, in Cebu, there's the Asilo Church, which is starting to become a significant church. No, although again it's not listed even locally yet. Uh, and then the government before, under Osmania, I think, was mayor, wanted to put a flyover right in front of it. So people were complaining because you're going to cover the church. Apparently, they think that, well, people value the image of the church. So what amazed me about this project is that it actually took too long for this to stop because it's now finished, no? It has already crossed the river, and so it's now right over here. And so they have to abandon the project, so as usual, no? So this now becomes a testament of stupidity on the part of DPWH. Something so obvious. And actually, somewhere here near going towards our direction where we are looking at, they have a bridge built later on. So if a bridge there was feasible, and then it does not really affect any cultural property, so why did they plan this one instead of that one? So it's really a mystery, no? Even Einstein is confused about these things. Protecting cultural workers and ensuring their professional development and well-being. I think this is the last objective. So one way to protect cultural workers is first to make sure that there will be cultural workers, and then that's through education. And through this law, so there's now the some, I think there's some courses offered in the basic education system. Um, some, I think you're now a product of K-12. I'm not sure if you, I hope you went through that, no? And then there are cultural heritage education programs, and then they make sure that information is available to the public, accessible to the public. Um, so for cultural heritage workers, they make sure that they have a roster of authenticators and evaluators or appraisers, so people who go there and then who assess and then say, okay, this is significant or not. Then there's a training plan, and then a general training plan on conservation and for local government units. Okay, um, and this one, application of scientific career merit system, simply means that uh, if someone with some qualifications like PhD works with the government, so they can be technically called a scientist, and so they can also be considered for some privileges as a scientist, like in the OST, so they can be, and their salary will be more. um, then there are a lot of benefits. So the practice of conservation. So here, uh, actually, I have very few items to say. Um, part You can be a heritage worker in many ways. One is that you are a documentator or a heritage recorder. So you document, no? By drawing, by photo. You can specialize even in heritage photography, um, or video, making documentaries, uh, or, or um, for example, like dances are archived as videos, no? So the dance is recorded, and so they can be, uh, and also the historical narrative. So a historian. So that's one way. Another way is to go into conservation science. So you're a conservation professional. So you test materials, recommend, make all of these recommendation when it comes to materials and methods used. And so your output is scientific record, and as a recorder, of course, you have the heritage record, and this completes the record for a given project. But other than this, you can also be a restorer, either a general contractor or specialist. No? For example, you only do carvings, so you're asked to do this. You only do windows, copy shells windows, so you're hired for that because no one else is doing that. I remember that I have to look for someone to make the wheels of the carretela, no, tartanilla, because no one does that anymore except for a very, very uh, specific locations. And the last is that you're an educator, no? So you train or you give workshops. But this means that um, there's actually no career path, a clear career path to become a heritage worker, a conservator. In fact, this will be one of your projects, which I will probably publish next week. I'm going to assign you to interview um, practicing conservator. Okay, but then I'm still um, making the list of people to interview because I have to approach them first that they agree and then let you interview them. And so you'll have to record your interview and submit the recording. I will also provide the list of questions, and then you can add more questions. That is the basic list. So to know more about the practice of conservation, okay? So that's basically the homework. This is not yet finished. Interview a practitioner in heritage conservation, record the interview, and submit the video. Questions can include but not limited on how they became a conservator, whether they work full-time as a conservator, whether they have a specialization as a conservator, their most memorable project, the challenges encountered as a conservator. Um, I think I'll still have to populate the questions. No? Um, that's to be done individually. Okay, I guess that's it. Um, so for now, um, after this, I will be posting some uh, things in your canvas. It's the write-up that relates to to the topic now, and also some, of course, the documents, the law itself, and some other documents. Um, by the way, on the third topic, if you notice, I did not talk about ethics. Okay, so you just have to read that up in the canvas, because there I posted a, or I'm going to post the Venice Charter, which is another charter where Bora Charter was based on. It's an older version, uh, because that is going to be the basis of the talk, a lecture given by a, I think it's an Indian professor, okay, about ethics, and then there are other materials so to for you to study. Okay, so that's it for now, and unless you have urgent questions, you can type them now. So I'll just turn off the recording